What's up, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Kids Talk Sports podcast. And on today's episode, I'm going to be talking about some college basketball conference tournaments. I'm going to be talking about Champ Week. I'm going to be talking about who I think could win some conference championships, who might be some dark horse teams in March Madness to make some runs. And stick around till the end because I have some shout-outs and a surprise for you guys at the end of the video. And I also have a question of the week for you guys. So I hope you enjoy this episode, and let's get into it. So first up, we'll start with the conference tournaments. So I'm going to be talking about the 5 big conferences who I think could make some runs, who I think is going to win, who I think deserves to win, stuff like that. So the first tournament we've got is the Big Ten Conference. This is a really interesting conference because you got teams like Wisconsin, who started the year off really, really, really well, and they were ranked top 10, top 5 in the nation, and then they lose 6 or 7 games in a row, and they're only 10 games above 500, which was really crazy to see happen. So you got teams like that, and then you've got teams like Michigan State who start off really bad, then they got hot, and now they're mid right now. They're going back and forth. They're winning 2, losing 2, winning 1, losing 1, stuff like that. And then you got teams like Purdue and Illinois who are red hot right now, in Iowa. So it's going to be really interesting to see how this Big Ten tournament goes, because I think a lot of these teams are really evenly matched. I think Purdue's going to win this, and Purdue is pretty much the big dog, and a lot of people think they're going to win this, but I think teams like Michigan State, Iowa, Illinois, those teams, I think they got a chance. I think watch out for Northwestern. They could definitely make a run in this Big Ten tournament. So I've got Purdue winning the Big Ten tournament. In the Big 12, this is where it gets really interesting. So they've got a couple teams ranked. They've got Houston at number 1, Iowa State at number 6, and Kansas at, I think, number 14. So they have those 3 solid teams. And then they have a bunch of teams that aren't ranked. But those teams have beaten a lot of ranked teams. And those teams could beat teams like Kansas and Houston and Iowa State. So my winner, I've got Iowa State winning this because they're red hot right now. They've been making a lot of runs. They've made a run here where they've won about 4 or 5 games in a row against tough opponents too. They've beaten teams like Kansas. I think they could beat Houston eventually, and I think they could be go really deep in March Madness this year. So watch out for Iowa State, and I've got them winning the Big 12 tournament over the number 1 team in the country right now, Houston Cougars. In the SEC, I've got this is probably the easiest one, but also kind of tough. So I have Tennessee just because I think they're the most deep team right now. They've got Dalton Connect, who I think is this is a hot take. I think he's the best player in college basketball right now. So they've got Dalton Connect. They've got Zakai Zeker, who's a solid point guard. They've got a bunch of different transfers. I think Tennessee is one of the deepest teams in the SEC. They've beaten teams like Alabama and Kentucky. But I think Kentucky could also be a solid team in the SEC tournament. I think they could be a team to make a run because they're really young, but they're really big also and talented. They've got some experience with Antonio Reeves, and they've got good coaching. Alabama, solid coaching. They're pretty. I wouldn't say they're deep. They don't have great depth, but they have solid depth. But Alabama's lost to Kentucky and Tennessee by a good amount, so I don't really have any hope in Alabama to make a run in the SEC tournament. So I've got Tennessee coming out on top and getting the automatic bid to March Madness, even though they're going to make it anyway. In the ACC, this is an easy pick. I'm going with North Carolina. This is an easy pick right here. I think teams like North Carolina State, Duke always usually makes a run in the ACC tournament. Usually teams like Virginia and Duke, I think, could make deep runs in the ACC tournament because Duke, I think, has the best chance at winning this other than North Carolina. I think North Carolina is the best team in the ACC. That's why I'm picking them to win this. But I think Duke has the best chance to win it because they've got experience. First of all, they've got Kyle Filipowski, who's one of the best players in college basketball. They have experience playing deep in the ACC tournament. I think they're gonna make a solid run in March Madness because they've got a bunch of experience. So, yeah. But Kyle Filipowski, I think, is a really huge. He's the key piece of their success if they want to have some success in March Madness and make a run. Kyle Filipowski has to be their guy. And in the Big East, this is a tough pick. I'm gonna pick UConn because I think they're the best team in the Big East. But the team I most like is got to be Marquette. And I'm going to talk about Marquette a little bit later in this episode. But UConn, they've beaten Marquette, they've beaten Creighton, they've beaten all those teams in the Big East that people think might have a shot against them. This should be an easy Big East championship for UConn. If they do not win this, though, because a lot of people are expecting them to win this, if they don't win this, I think that they could be bumped from a 1 seed to maybe a 2 or a 3. If they get knocked out in the first round, that could bump them all the way down to like a 3 or 4 seed in March Madness this year. But we'll see. So to recap who I have winning these conference tournaments, I've got in the Big 10, I have Purdue winning it. In the Big 12, I've got Iowa State. In the SEC, I have Tennessee. In the ACC, I have North Carolina. And in the Big East, I have UConn. So that wraps up my conference championship predictions. And now we'll move on to my dark horse teams for March Madness this year. So these are teams that I think could make runs that are expected to get first rounded, and they're pretty high seeds that I think could make runs to the Sweet 16, Elite 8, and Final Four. So the first team we have is the Princeton Tigers, who are expected right now to be a 12 seed if they win their conference tournament. So first of all, they've got to win their conference tournament. Princeton, I really like their team a lot. So last year, as you know, they came in to March Madness as a 15 seed. They knocked off number 2 Arizona. Then they knocked off number 7 Creighton. So they made a pretty deep run. I think it was the Sweet 16 when they got eliminated. Oh, they knocked off number 2 Arizona, number 7 Missouri, and number 3 Creighton, I think. So they made a really good run. They beat some pretty solid teams. So I think Princeton could also make that deep run again. Again, right now they're expected as a 12 seed, but they need to win their conference tournament. But they got a lot of solid players. Nebraska is expected as a 9 seed without winning their conference tournament. So without winning the Big Ten, they're expected as a 9 seed. I think they will get in to the tournament this year. They are red hot. They've been winning a lot of games. They upset Wisconsin. They upset Purdue this year. They have the depth to really go far and beat a lot of good teams this year. They can be really, really solid. Now, next one I have is Indiana State. Okay, Indiana State's a really interesting team from the Missouri Valley Conference because they lost to teams like Illinois State, who are not very good, not good at all. But then they've beaten some solid teams like Drake and Bradley from the Missouri Valley, and they almost beat Michigan State, which was surprising. So Indiana State, though, they've got to win. They have to win the Missouri Valley Conference Tournament to get in. Then if they get in, they should be an 11 or 12 seed, maybe a 13. But I think they should be a 12 seed, is what they're expected to be right now if they win their conference tournament. They could make a deep run. Last year, Drake won the Missouri Valley Conference, and they were a 12 seed. They almost knocked off number 5 Miami, who made it to the national championship. So I think Indiana State, with really good depth and a really, really solid starting 5, they could make a really deep run in March Madness this year. And then our last team, I've got Vermont. Now, Vermont last year, I think they came in as a 15 seed, almost knocked off a 2 seed, but they just have, I think they're a really underrated team. They're like the underdogs. No one's been talking about them, but they got to win their conference tournament, first of all. A lot of these dark horse teams, they got to win their conference tournament to get in. And then once they get in, then they can make their moves. So I think Vermont, they're kind of I have some hope that they could be a dark horse team to maybe make it to the Sweet 16, but we'll see. But they do have really good depth. So again, my dark horse teams are Princeton, Nebraska, Indiana State, and Vermont. And for my March Madness champion prediction, I'm going to go with Marquette. Now, this might surprise you guys because UConn was the number 1 team in the country. They got bumped down to number 2. they crushed Marquette. So a lot of people think Marquette has no chance. But Marquette could be really dangerous. They've got Tyler Kolek, who's great, a great guard, a great facilitator. They have Cam Jones. They've got Oso Iguodala, and then they got Shaka Smart as their coach with really, really good depth. So Marquette is just set up for March Madness perfectly. And so, before we end off this episode, I have some shout outs to give to people who answered the question of the week. So the next shout out goes to Ensley. Said their favorite baseball team is the Yankees, but they got their first game ball at Fenway, so that's their favorite stadium. So shout out to Ensley. The next shout out goes to Ezra, who said the best college basketball team. So for women's, they think is Iowa, and for men's, they think is Houston. And their favorite baseball team is the New York Yankees. So shout out to, thank you, Ezra. And the next shout out goes to Henry and Max, who said Henry's favorite team is the Brewers, and Max's favorite team is the Twins. So shout out to Henry and Max. And the last shout out goes to Zeke, who said their favorite team is the New York Mets. So shout out to all those listeners who answered last week's question of the week. And for this week's question of the week is, who do you think will win March Madness? Again, this week's question of the week is, who do you think will win March Madness? And to answer that question, there's two ways you can answer that question. First, you can send it into my email, and my email is talksportswithmason@gmail.com. Again, my email is talksportswithmason@gmail.com. But another way you could do that is I am making a March Madness bracket group. So if any of you guys are interested in joining my March Madness bracket group to make a bracket and, see if you can come out on top and beat all the others, I'll be looking at your guys' brackets to see who you think will win March Madness. But if you're listening to this on Spotify and Apple Podcasts, then the link will be in the show notes. And if you're watching this on YouTube, then the link will be in the description. And if you'd like to watch this on YouTube, my YouTube channel is GameWithMase. Again, my YouTube channel is GameWithMase, and I'll be posting some gaming content on there in a bit. But so shout out to all of you guys for listening to my podcast. As always, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I will see you next time.